Okay, so welcome back to another Resident Evil difficulty discussion, tips and tricks advice video that I've done over the past few weeks. Today, we're going to be looking at Resident Evil 4's Professional Mode. Now, as with all of these videos, this is not going to be like an in-depth, here's what you should be doing to make the game easier type thing. It's not a guide, it's just a general piece of advice where we go over what the mode is, the differences between the normal mode and the harder mode, so in this case it's Professional, and then some of my own tips and tricks, things that may help you be more successful in your run of the harder difficulties. Like I said, I don't follow guides and stuff like that on Resident Evil games. I figure it all out for myself, and it's just a bit more fulfilling to do that in my opinion. So I don't want to throw out any guides, this is just my advice on how I did it personally. You may have different opinions and different ways of doing things, and if you do, be sure to leave them in the comments for anyone to see. But yeah, here we go. So first and foremost, the differences between normal and professional in Resident Evil 4 are not huge, you know. This is not a Madhouse mode, this is not a real survivor mode, there is not anything that's massively different. The only real changes are the fact that you take more damage, enemies take more damage, and you can find a lot less ammo in barrels and crates and stuff like that. And I believe the currency, I forget what it's called in Resident Evil 4, but you get less of it through the run. So you get less money to buy upgrades, less ammo, and there's more enemies. There's not more enemies, but they hit harder, they're a bit more aggressive, and you do less damage to them. So that is really it in terms of the changes between normal and hard. Not anywhere near on a scale of Madhouse where it changes things. It's just a case of enemies are harder to kill, you're easier to kill, and there's less ammo around. So they're the real main things to be aware of. Now, I would personally say with Resident Evil 4, the hardest parts are the last 25% of the game, which you would think is obvious because it's the end of the game. That's not always the case with the Resident Evil games. Sometimes the hardest part is early on. For example, in Resident Evil 2, I would say it's harder early on than it is later on because you have less ammo, less supplies and stuff like that. Whereas Resident Evil 4, personally, again, the last half, well, the last quarter of the game is where the game gets more difficult, and you know, it progressively just gets harder. But Resident Evil 4 has a really interesting system in place called adaptive difficulty, and that is constantly running no matter what difficulty you're playing on. So we're going to go over what that is right now. So adaptive difficulty, how best to explain how this works. Basically, the game is always watching how well you're doing and how not so well you're doing. Just to kind of throw in some key kind of points in the game where this takes effect. The water room, the notorious water room in Resident Evil 4. Very difficult room to get through, especially on Professional, and even I've struggled with it in the past. Adaptive difficulty will kind of see that you're struggling and it will change the room, not massively, but it will make it slightly easier. And the main thing that people notice with adaptive difficulty in that room is when you first go in, on the back side of the room, there's two archer granados in the left and right corner, and they basically shoot crossbow bolts at you the entire time. If you do constantly fail in that room, they will despawn. They will not spawn in the next attempt. It is just there to make things a little bit more easier for you. Some people might not even notice that they're actually gone, but they are not there. So that is something the game does to kind of recognize you're not doing so well, so we're going to remove these enemies for you to make it less of a hassle. A few other minor things you might not notice is if the game feels you're not doing so great in terms of your resource management and weapons and stuff like that, it may give you more ammo or more healing depending on what you really need at the time. Again, it's when the game recognizes you're suffering rather than just randomly changing how it wants the game to kind of deal with you. It does recognize you're doing poorly, so it will kind of make things easier for you. And then again, that does go the other way. Like if you're doing too good or you're doing really well, the game will up the ante a little bit by spawning more enemies in waves, giving you less ammo and less supplies when looting and stuff like that. So it does go both ways, and I think that's a really good system personally. I think it's a system that a lot of Resident Evil games should personally have. You know, you play on high difficulty and you're doing well, so the game makes it a little bit harder. It's not a huge jump in difficulty, okay? It's not like it's going to go, okay, you're playing on Professional, you're doing really well, you haven't died yet, we're going to throw an unkillable enemy at you. You have to avoid. It's nothing like that. It's small things. Some people might not even notice them. Like, if you're very kind of practiced in the game and already know what's what and where things spawn in terms of enemies and stuff like that, you aren't really going to notice because you'll just be blasting through it anyway. But no, I think adaptive difficulty, again, it's a really cool system. I do think it should be in other RE games. I'm not 100% sure if it's in any other games. I could be wrong. Someone will have to fact check that for me, but or prove me wrong in the comments. But I don't think it appears in any other Resident Evil game. But it's pretty prominent in this one, and people really seem to like it, so it's a nice little touch. So next up, I'll go through my kind of advice for how I dealt with Professional. Again, this is my own personal kind of tips for you. It's not stuff that's going to guarantee you beat it. It's just my own personal kind of, this is how I did it to make the game easier for me, okay? So let's just go through the list of tips, explain what I mean, and hopefully they all make sense. First of all, save ammo. Ammo in this game is quite common. You get a lot of ammo in this game. Obviously the game is more action focused, so bullets are more plentiful. That being said, Professional does give you less, so you do want to be a bit more sparing with your ammunition. The best way to deal with this is the kick is really effective in waves of enemies, okay? So if you stagger one Ganado and you are able to kick him and he is surrounded by others, if you kick, you're going to hit all of them, and it does a lot of damage, and it does knock them down, and it gives you an opportunity to run past if you can. So it's very useful to stagger and kick in this game, and even, you know, just move around things, like walk around enemies and not shoot at all. Like, if you know where you're going, you know what you're doing, you're going to be able to save a lot of ammo because you're not going to have to kill everything in the area. That does lead me into my next piece of advice, and this one's pretty obvious. It's practice before you do Professional. Like I said, the game does not change at all in terms of what you need to do and where you need to go between normal and Professional. It's the same game, except things just hit you a lot harder. Practice the game on normal a few times until you're comfortable to know where you're going and what you're doing at every point of the game. Again, doing that means that you can get to a certain area where you need to get to a certain item or need to complete a certain puzzle, and you can avoid a lot of the enemies because you know exactly what you're doing, exactly where to go, exactly where the things you need are, and you can kind of speedrun it a little bit. Next up, and this one really does kind of focus on Resident Evil 4 specifically, and that is kind of know how to control Ashley. This may sound weird, but you can obviously choose when you want Ashley to follow you or not. You can tell her to wait, you can tell her to go, and in combat she generally stands behind you most of the time. Sometimes she can get in the way and you can accidentally shoot her or something like that, and it does get annoying, but just kind of always kind of be aware of where she is or where you are, because obviously if she's right behind you and there's a group of enemies behind you, they're going to go for her first, and then that causes them to grab her and then start walking away with her, and then you have to follow them and deal with them, and it gets really annoying. So just positioning, I guess, is the main thing with Ashley. So just know where you are, know where she is. If you need to keep her in one position, just have to wait and she won't move. One thing I like to do is kind of get it to a secure point. If there's like an area where you need to kill enemies, get her behind you and tell her to wait, and then kind of stand in the way. Like, you can move around, she's not right next to you, and you can kind of maneuver without her getting hit. Because a lot of the times I've failed in Professional is because she's died and not me. And that can be very, very frustrating at times. My next thing is know what you're doing against the bosses. Now, the bosses in Resident Evil 4 aren't particularly difficult, okay? And the funny thing is about the bosses in this game is they all have a method. They all have a really simple way of killing them. For example, Krauser, the actual Krauser fight, not the QTE fight, the actual Krauser fight. On any difficulty, you can kill him with a knife in like a minute. Like, he dies very quickly with just a knife. It's quite funny when you get to that fight and you just pull out a knife and he can't do anything to you and it's over. It's very entertaining to do that. If you do not know that method, by all means look it up. I'll leave a link in the description to it if you really want it. And it does help progress that fight. A lot of the kind of stakes of that fight disappear when you know what you're doing with the knife. Again, with Salazar as well, you can stand in a certain spot in that arena. I believe it's literally where the game spawns you in the fight. If you do not move and you time your shots so you get the stuns on his one-shot move pretty on the point, he won't hit you at all. You will not take any damage. He'll kind of just stand there and be weak in his weak form the whole time, and you can kill him pretty quickly. And then again with Mendez, incendiary grenades. They seem to be really strong against him for whatever reason. So every boss has a method. Learn the method. If you, for example, get to the Mendez fight and don't have many incendiary grenades, maybe reconsider loading a previous file, getting a load of incendiary grenades through luck, or however means possible, and just stockpile them until you get to him, because he'll die pretty quickly. But that's basically going to be it. Do let me know if any of these kind of ring a bell with you. Let me know if you use any of these ideas that I've mentioned. Let me know if you have any other pieces of advice for other people. Because it's always interesting to see what other people do in terms of how they beat the game. But yeah, thank you for watching. I think there's a few more games I want to cover on the harder difficulties, and then we're moving on to games outside of RE, so look forward to those. But yeah, thank you all for coming by, and I'll see you all tomorrow for a brand new video.